So we're going to start with another mailbag session. Remember, these are questions and comments you leave on the channel. I'm going to try and answer. And I'm getting quite a lot of questions on the channel at the moment, so there may be a bit of a backlog and maybe a number of these going up shortly. So this one's from Don Devore, a frequent commenter on the channel, and he writes, thanks for addressing my long-winded comments. I must have written Jupiter X, but I was referring to the Jupiter XM with the XV patch bank. I think I sort of kind of got what you meant. I was just wondering whether they're using the original PCM samples that were used on the JVXP, XV, Phantom series and the Integra 7. If so, then the Jupiter XM in 2020 is a using patches created in 1990. I find that kind of amusing. Kind of, I suppose I do as well. This was in response to a mailbag I did fairly recently about the ZEN-Core comments and the various bits and bobs. Well, I have to be honest and say that, you know, in a way, I hadn't really thought about it, but given that they have the original sources for all of these instruments, I'd be highly surprised if they weren't using those original sources as the basis for what's gone into the ZEN-Core engines. I can't really see Roland going back and resampling them per se, although they probably have done some work to clean them up, possibly for the ZEN-Core operation. But yes, some of these files possibly will be dating back to the 1990s. Very interesting. Good comment. Okay, next one from Louis. Haha, what have I let myself in for? How are you liking it a year later? This is in response to me unboxing the DT7. And then I did some further stuff on this earlier in the year about using the DT7 or just setting it up. And I think I've actually moved on a lot from that as well as I've used it. But I've got to be honest and say I'm not really using it at the moment. It is here. You know, there is my DT7. Wrong way up. Still wrong way up, yeah. Should be that way up. I have been using this, but for the last few months, this has actually been sitting in the house, not in the studio. I had the DX7 up here for a while, and I've taken it back down the studio, but this hasn't sort of gone back down the studio. What I'm actually really need is a box to put this in for storage, which is probably the reason why it's still here, is to remind me I need to go and buy a box for it. So that when it does go into storage, it gets properly protected. So I really like this, and one of the things I will say about the build quality is this is super well built. I will also say it was very easy to get up and running, so that was two really good positives for it. One of the things I will say about the DT7, in fact, anything that's sort of in this area, is that you really need to understand the the oscillator patterns for the DX7. So when you start to program a patch, you can select the pattern that you are effectively programming that patch against. And with this thing, you can switch on and off the oscillators using the buttons on the side here, which switches the oscillators in and out. Now, depending on the pattern or the algorithm that you're using in terms of the DX7, changes how these things switch in and out. And it maybe it was just me. I mean, I do sort of kind of understand how to program FM, but it's not. I wouldn't claim to be an expert in it. But it did take my head a little while to work out why things were going astray, and it was all to do with the oscillation pattern. So if the pattern you select only uses 4 oscillators, or 4 of the oscillators in a certain pattern, if you try to switch in number 5, you get some rather interesting results. So that's kind of what I'm saying about the DT7, is that you've got to really understand the DX7 to understand how the DT7 needs to work. Hopefully that's answered that one. This one's from my friend Bruce. in response to the Death the Cakewalk, something I did over a year, well, nearly 2 years ago actually now. And he writes, the cloud in data storage is no cloud at all. The cloud is only someone else's computer, and it's someone else who you do not know. Do not trust the cloud ever. Cheers, Bruce. And he makes a very, very important point actually about cloud computing. Cloud computing is not about somebody else or using somebody else's equipment. It's all about the level of risk that you're prepared to take. So when you give your data over to a cloud provider, you need to make sure that you understand the safeguards that are in place to protect your data. Now, some of the big boys, the likelihood of you losing your data is probably pretty slim. They've got safeguards in place. They back up your data. They make sure the data is redundant. However, you need to understand several things. Number one, where's that data being stored? Is it being stored in North America? Is it being stored in Europe? Is it being stored in both North America and Europe? Is it backing up from one place to another? If so, are you legally allowed to store it in these places? So in Europe, we have a European directive all about personal data and stuff like that, which means that you can't store personal data from a European company in a data center outside the European Union. So there are some laws around that sort of stuff. The other thing is to understand what the safeguards are in place should that company go bust, or should that data center blow up, or whatever it happens to be. So having the word cloud just means you really need to do your homework and work out where in the cloud, or actually where is the physical location of your data going to be stored, and how easy is it to get your data back should your data provider go bang. So I think cloud is all about risk, and I use the cloud quite a lot, because that's sort of kind of part of the whole Apple ecosystem. But I don't keep my data on the cloud. It tends to stay in the cloud while I'm doing things. So it just makes it easy for me to get stuff off the iPad and off the phone and onto the computer, and then it's stored and I know it's okay. But once I've actually finished, I've mastered something, I'm happy with the end results, then I take all the files and I store them in a backed up location. And I have 2 backup locations, which I'm not telling you where they are, but I do have 2 backup locations, and I write the data simultaneously to both locations, and both locations are protected by RAID 5 infrastructure. Yes, I'm a little bit paranoid like that, but that's how I do it. You know, you just got to work out how you want to do it and how you're going to sort of maintain this stuff. And the final one from this section from Tin, T-I-N, Matthias. All right, you need not buy only a USB cable, but mini stereo phone jacks, 2 male TRS jacks, and if you want to connect to other pedals or indirect to an audio interface, yeah, you've got to do your research and add these cables and order the DO5. So this is in response to an unboxing and first impressions video I did on the DX05. Sorry, not the DX, the DO5. And I've kind of said on numerous occasions that I do not like the fact that the boutiques use these 3/8 of an inch or mini jacks, as they're now more well known. I just don't think, I've never thought they're robust enough for live gig work. In the studio it's probably fine because you're not going to be pulling the cables in and out on a too frequent basis, but for live gig work where you are hoofing these things around, plugging them in, plugging them out, those sockets, honestly, they're not going to last. You can use pedals and other controller features of a master keyboard, but then you need a master keyboard to lug around with you to use these things. So there's more cables, more equipment than you need for these things. But if you want to use the unit itself, then at a minimum you will need a micro USB to a USB-A cable, a USB-A to a USB-A for supplying power. You'll need a power brick, something like this thing. Okay. To supply the power to the unit itself. You'll need a USB splitter to split the power and the USB into power and data. And then you'll need a stereo mini jack to phono, XLR or 1/4 inch jack to run the connector into your mixer, and that's just at a bare minimum. So remember, when you go and buy a boutique, when it's going to cost you £350 or whatever it happens to be, remember you're going to probably have to put another £30 on top of that just to buy the cables to actually service it to run it. So good point, well made, Matthias. And is that for this mailbag.
Remember, hit that like button if you like what you saw. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified about more rants, more mailbag, more questions and answers, and more videos about this sort of stuff when it's loaded to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.